The glowing aether blade descended in a vicious arc, aimed perfectly to sever Kalia's spine. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't weave a shield in time. Then, a blur of motion, Jackson violently intercepted the lethal strike. The assassin's energy weapon collided with his sheer physical density, sparking violently as bone met pure plasma. The collision of flesh and aether shattered everything she knew about survival. Subscribe to the archives to see what broke next. That same smell of ozone and raw static had clung to the air exactly 3 days ago. Kalia had been kneeling on the cold metallic floor of her secure laboratory, coughing as the ancient stasis vault finally hissed open. A low hiss, then a profound, deafening silence. The chaotic, ether energy that constantly buzzed around the young Princess Kalia vanished the second the vault unsealed. She was a novice to the throne, barely of age, her mind a storm of untrained psychic currents. She had opened a tomb from a dead world and found the only thing that could keep her mind alive. Standing before the awakened occupant, her thoughts settled into crystalline clarity. He stepped out, an extinct Terran. The restricted royal archives had described his kind in dry academic terms. The architects had genetically engineered Terran biology to act as a gravity well for rogue frequencies. Their cellular density absorbed chaotic psychic fallout, turning them into physical anchors for ether weavers who would otherwise burn themselves out. It was a perfect biological symbiosis designed to combine differing vulnerabilities into a unified whole. Kalia had spent her entire short life terrified of her own volatile abilities, constantly on the verge of burning her own mind to ash. But reading about it was nothing like feeling it. He stumbled forward, disoriented, catching his balance against the exam table. Kalia reached out instinctively to steady him. It was the pressing of his unnaturally warm, dense hand against her cool, delicate palm. Gravity. He felt like a collapsing star. There was no aether in him, no psychic hum, just heavy, undeniable mass. Jackson Vance looked down at their connected hands, his breathing ragged but steadying. In an empire ruled entirely by the mind, the most dangerous weapon was a man who could not be read. Can a purely physical being truly protect a mind so fragile? The lab smelled of sterile chemicals and old dust. Kalia traced the rim of the stasis pod, marveling at the sheer physicality of the Terran. Her own people were ethereal, their bodies fragile vessels for immense mental power. A stiff wind could bruise a Lamari. Jackson, however, moved with a dense, coiled power. Every step he took had a terrifying, deliberate weight. He was the antithesis of everything her culture valued, yet she felt safer in his shadow than she ever had surrounded by the royal guard. He was a creature of blood and bone, operating entirely outside the frequencies her people used to control the galaxy. For 2 days they hid in the sanctuary of the lab. She studied his vitals. He studied the structural weak points of her doors. He spoke little. When he did, his voice vibrated in his chest, a physical sensation she could feel through the floorboards. She showed him the archive data. They were engineered to be anchors for a crumbling society. Now, with the Lamari Dominion fracturing under its own psychic weight, they were the only thing stopping a galactic collapse. Then the warning sirens triggered. High Inquisitor Vorik had not come to negotiate. Kalia watched the perimeter feeds as Vorik's armed strike force blew the outer courtyard gates. They were coming to seize her research and usurp her fragile position before she could claim her full royal authority. Jackson did not ask questions. He picked up a heavy Duracell wrench from her diagnostic cart. The air outside the lab crackled as the strike force breached the corridor, their ether blades igniting with a sickening hum. Kalia tried to manifest a protective ward, but her panic made the aether energy slip through her mental grasp like water. The heavy doors blew inward, a concussive wave of heat and shrapnel throwing her to the ground. The assassins poured through the smoke, their eyes completely dark, locked onto the young princess. The assassin in the lab didn't even have time to swing. Jackson stepped into the strike zone. He moved with a heavy, terrifying momentum. He shattered the guard's wrist with one hand. tossing the unconscious Lumari aside like discarded linen. Kalia stared. Her heart beat in a strange, erratic rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. They broke the blockade that night. Vorik sealed the capital and formally challenged her fitness to rule. She had 3 days to prepare for a council trial. 3 days to prove Terrans were not just myths but necessary saviors. They fled to the void wastes. It was a frantic recovery mission to awaken 5 more dormant Terrans from a hidden cache. Inside the cramped hull of her transport, the distance between them vanished. Kalia found herself sitting close enough to feel the radiant heat of his skin. She was a creature of thought and light. He was muscle and gravity. Yet, when she closed her eyes, the chaotic noise of the universe went perfectly quiet as long as he was near. During the council trial, the massive rotunda was packed with hostile adjudicators. Kalia stood at the center podium. She reached out and placed her hand flat against Jackson's chest. Under her fingers, his steady heartbeat acted as a metronome for her frantic mind. Anchored to his density, she wove a flawless, terrifying storm of ether. Every adjudicator's heavy stone desk lifted 3 feet into the air. She didn't break a single sweat. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Symbiosis was undeniably real. Then the floor violently shook. Vorik, refusing defeat, activated the Citadel's void resonator. A city-wide wave of paralyzing anti-frequency slammed into the rotunda. Every Lumari collapsed. Kalia hit the marble floor, her mind pinned by agonizing static. Jackson did not fall. The machine targeted psychic frequencies. He had none. He dragged Kalia behind a shattered pillar. His eyes held a quiet, furious promise. Then he left her there, charging alone out of the rotunda and straight up the steps of the Inquisitor's citadel to end the broadcast. Against her screaming nerves, she forced herself to crawl after him. She dragged her paralyzed body up the citadel steps. She breached the core room just as Vorik's final elite guard dropped from the vaulted ceiling. And now, beneath the sparking machinery of the resonator, the falling assassin's blade came down. The lethal strike sparked violently against Jackson's forearms, burning flesh but failing to cut bone. Kalia gasped. The Terran didn't just stop the plasma, he caught the assassin by the throat. With a sickening sound, Jackson crushed the elite guard's windpipe and hurled the heavy body directly into the void resonator's control panel. The massive machine imploded in a shower of blue sparks. The paralyzing wave vanished instantly. Vorik fell to his knees, staring in absolute horror at the bleeding, unstoppable human. 5 years later. The palace gardens smelled of blooming night orchids. Kalia sat on a carved stone bench, the heavy crown of the Empress resting on her brow. Jackson settled beside her. A few yards away, their young hybrid daughter laughed, her small hands glowing with perfectly stabilized aether light. Kalia looked down at her own lap. Jackson reached over, the pressing of his unnaturally warm, dense hand against her cool, delicate palm. It wasn't just an anchor anymore. It was everything. We will uncover what other dormant secrets the architects left buried in tomorrow's transmission.